Hey, what's going on, world? In this video, we're going to talk about a really neat topic, which is why cybersecurity is important. Stay tuned. So, the first thing I think we need to all understand about cybersecurity is that, yeah, it's showing up on the news, and a lot of people might think of it as a buzzword, and a lot of people are going to respectfully so, say, hey, you can make a lot of money in cybersecurity. But truthfully, how many people really know what cybersecurity really is? It's such a niche department. It's such a particular topic or particular department of a category of security that falls under the umbrella of information technology. So to break this down, cybersecurity, understanding what it is the state or process, the ability rather, of protecting and recovering computer systems, networks, devices, and programs from any type of cyber attack. So you could ask anybody the same question. They might give you that particular definition, but if you go and ask somebody who's been doing cybersecurity specifically for 30, 40 years, what have you, 10, 15 years, it really depends on who you ask, but ultimately it's all about protecting the data. Information technology is all about the data in general, how we, get data on systems, how we migrate data, how we create data. I mean, there's a lot of things that are involved in information technology or IT, but when it comes to cybersecurity, it really is about protecting the data that's already there. And in some unique cases, you might even have situations where you're hired as an engineer and you're asked to create the infrastructure in order to then go and protect that data later on. So cybersecurity really falls under the umbrella of what we call the CIA Triad. The CIA Triad is what we call, it's acronyms, by the way. It's not the Central Intelligence Agency, but it is the acronym that stands for confidentiality, which is encrypting the data. Integrity, which is the integrity of the files, and that's where we talk about hashing, different type of hashing technologies that we can use to really secure or try to dial in the accessibility of the data and to see if it's ever been tampered with. And then availability, which is the acronym for A in the CIA Triad, that is about just keeping the servers up and running. So, and just keeping the data available when needed, making sure that we protect it at all costs. So understanding what cybersecurity is, that would be my definition, is protecting it through the CIA Triad. Now, to continue, why is it important? So cybersecurity is important because it not only protects all the data that you are hired as an engineer to protect or hired as a SOC analyst to protect, but ultimately it protects all categories. It's important because it protects all the categories of information or data in general, and these categories can fall under many different type of scopes, if you will. So we have sensitive data, which is basically just data that can be, secured by the government, or maybe it's sensitive to yourself. I mean, when we talk about data, it could be embarrassing Christmas pictures, where you don't want anybody to see. And, it could be just simply something sensitive to you. It may not be if it, something that got leaked out there in the world, on the dark web, what have you. It may not be something that's sensitive to other people and what they get value out of it, but it could be very sensitive to you. Or it could go all the way to military blueprints for some type of new fighter jet that they're working on. So sensitive data really falls into the scope of how sensitive it is to the individual that's working with it. Also, we have what's called PII. PII stands for Personal Identifiable Information. So personal identifiable information are things like your address, your social security number, your license number, your birth date, anything that is personal to you. And that's why when you call the bank, they'll usually ask you, hey, can we have your address? Can we have your phone number? Can we have what color underwear are you wearing? I mean, they'll ask you all these personal questions to make sure it's actually you. And on top of that, they'll even send you a code to your phone if they do some type of MFA, which is multi-factor authentication. They'll ensure that you are who you say you are, and then send you that code and make sure that you're, the person that you say you are. So that's personal identifiable information. Now, here's another one that we don't really hear a lot, but it falls under the code of HIPAA. So HIPAA falls under PHI, and PHI is personal health information. So everything that has to do with your medical records, maybe shots you've taken, particular surgery procedures you've had in the past, anything that we're talking about in the health information world needs to be secure. So that can fall under maybe you working for a hospital or some type of medical department. There's also particular companies that work with technologies like Surga, where they'll basically have a company or a service that is provided to hospitals where they host the data for them, or they might provide some type of technological tools to the hospitals, and there's data that's hosted, that's personal health information, to make sure that data is analyzing everything coming from the hospital. So personal health information is all about, the health industry, and of course, that can scope into many different umbrellas and branches. Intellectual property. So that could be things like, copyrights, or let's say you just created a new song, or you have some type of art gallery, you have a secret recipe. For instance, like intellectual property can be considered like Coca-Cola's recipe. It's their intellectual property. It's what they created. It's something that they came up with, and they have a secret that they don't want anybody else to have. It's intellectual to them. And sometimes you fall into some copyright issues, like for instance in YouTube, you post a video or some type of song and it gets a copyright violation. Well, that kind of all falls under the umbrella of intellectual property. So it's important to keep that data safe. And usually there's a lot of laws that are, there is a lot of laws kind of involved in PHI and PII, and they all kind of scope into different categories. But there's a lot of copyright laws that are kind of just out there and can definitely get you in a lot of trouble if you violate them. So there's governmental data. Governmental data can be things like ITAR, which is Arms and Regulations. There's many different entities out there when it comes to the government. Now, a lot of companies will do affiliates where the government, or rather a company that works for government contractors or provides a service to them, like let's say Deloitte or EY or BDO, which are tax and auditing companies, they offer that service to government. They might branch off and do what's called a GPS affiliated subsidiary company, which they'll branch away from the parent company. They'll still be a part of the parent company, but it'll be a completely niche department. And what they'll do is they'll specialize in what we call GPS, or government public sector, and they'll work with this very sensitive government type of data. So the government needs to get their affairs in order. They need to, get up to speed with compliance. And what they'll do is they will, work with these auditing companies or taxes, whatever they're working on specifically, and they will send their data to those companies, and that will be considered government data. That would be where you would see most of that data be hosted in. And then you have industry information security, where that data is more or less coming from different industries, or I would like to say industrial, so power plants, utilities companies, what have you. So that's kind of why it's important. Overall, cyber criminals are getting smarter in their tactics, and they are becoming more resilient to conventional cyber defenses. So if you aren't aware, there's actually quite a few attacks that just happened this month alone in September or 2023, where we had the Sony data breach. That was September 25th. Today's the 28th, so we're talking like 3 days ago. We had Topgolf, which that was a data breach back in September 5th of this month. And if we actually go all the way back to August 31st, which was like a month ago, we have the Forever 21 data breach that happened. So all these data breaches, if you're not aware, are happening continuously, and they just kind of go one after the other, after the other, after the other. But because they don't really break out in the news, it's also something for us as cybersecurity professionals to have to go and look at, because we really want to be up to speed and aware of how sophisticated these cyber criminals are getting in. So I think that leads to another important concept, which is, why is cybercrime increasing? Well, information theft is the most expensive and fastest growing segment of cybercrime. In one of my videos, I talked about different threat actors, different reasons to, kind of consider the emotional tie-ins to hackers and why they do what they do. A lot of them could be doing it for ethical reasons. There might be like what we call hacktivists, where they have political gain. We could have nation states where they're hired by a government to specifically exploit and basically go into recon phases into whatever target they have, so that the government that hired that hacker can get information back. And that's usually then targeting military bases and political campaigns and all that stuff. If you'd like to know more about that, definitely check out my last video that I put in, which was about different hackers. But ultimately, when it comes to the fastest growing segment of cybercrime, it's the financial aspects, the financial gain that these threat actors get. The first thing that tends to happen is they will go in there and do some type of brute force attack into whatever target they're going after. So Sony, for instance, they reported multiple issues with ransomware, where ransomware is where the threat actor or hacker will get into your system, they'll find your data and they'll lock it down and say, hey, we're not going to release this data back to you without you paying some type of compensation to us. And that could be millions, billions, however much money. And that's one form of a hack when it comes to these data breaches where there's financial gain involved. I would say almost 100% of the time, these hackers are trying to get in for these sole purposes. Imagine robbing a bank, but doing it, anonymously, doing it online, doing it to companies that, in these hackers' opinions, have deeper pockets than they could ever really know. So they'll go in there and make an attack on them and not have any resort or any type of resentment specifically on what they did on their part. So ultimately, when it comes to the financial gain, it's largely driven by the increasing exposure of identity information to the web, and what that means is people will, purposely and probably unintentionally, unbeknownst to them, will go on social media and they'll just post, pictures of them at the office. Nothing really wrong with that as far as a culture aspect. The problem is that when they do that, they don't even notice that behind them, they could have somebody working on some really, really highly sensitive code. Let's say that it's a software development company, or someone could have an article brought up that's sensitive to that company and they didn't look to obfuscate that picture. And I've even heard of unique cases where people will do this and actually get fired, unfortunately, for these particular pictures that they post. Now, it doesn't mean that they did anything wrong, in my opinion. They probably mean well, but unfortunately, with their NDAs, their non-disclosure agreements, they will post these pictures on their social media platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And they won't even be aware that they just posted something where information in the background is being exposed. And that company can get in a lot of trouble, and there could be even considered a data breach if the wrong information is presented. So cyber criminals are becoming more sophisticated and also changing what they target, how they affect organizations, and then their methods of attacks on different security systems. So there's different methods and many different ways that they will try to attack and exploit a vulnerability, which a vulnerability is basically an issue in the company system that the company is either aware or not aware of. It has just not been patched. It has not been fixed. It has not been mitigated. A prime example would be somebody or a company using Windows 7, where they know that had an end of life and they are still using it for whatever purpose, or our 2008 Windows server that has a wide array of vulnerabilities just simply because it's not supported anymore by the vendor Microsoft. These are point case most of the issues I see in the real world with my role as a security engineer. So anyway, I appreciate everybody. Thank you for staying tuned, staying to the end of this video. Hopefully you've grasped something out of this video, but this is a short and just kind of simplistic overview of why cybersecurity is important. So have a good one.